This is Capital Notes from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Maayan Silver in conversation with J.R. Ross. He's editor of WizPolitics.com. Hi, J.R. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, so big news last week. The Wisconsin Supreme Court issued a decision on a case that's colloquially called the 400-year-old veto. Back in 2023, Democratic Governor Tony Evers used his really expansive veto pen to lock in school funding for 400 years by he basically took language that originally allowed for a $325 per student increase in K through 12 public schools. It said it applied to the 2023-24-2024 and 2024-2025 school years, and Evers vetoed the 20 and the hyphen to make the end date 2425, which is more than 4 centuries from now. That's a long synopsis, but what can you tell us about that decision, JR?
Well, one, there's a legal piece to it. What the court is saying is that governors have the power to strike out individual numbers in a budget. So back in 1990, voters approved this amendment to the Constitution that said governors can no longer strike out individual letters. They called it the Vanna White veto. The court said, look, that amendment didn't include language about digits or numerals, so you can't apply it to this, therefore this amendment is constitutional. Then there's the political and budget impact. Republican lawmakers have been saying for weeks they want to see this decision before taking up the budget. They want to know how expansive the governor's power is going to be because they're kind of worried, or were worried, that if there was going to be a decision from the court that upheld this veto, the governor might get more aggressive in how he kind of approaches language in the budget. Well, they have their decision, and now they're kind of fretting about, their power being usurped, and Governor Evers has this expansive, even more expansive way to work the budget bill. So the question becomes, can they reach some kind of deal on the budget? Is there some kind of way to protect the language from what the governor can do now with this kind of decision under his belt? Like every budget I've covered for all these years, the last thing that lawmakers do is they have their kind of key policy wonks get in a room and look at this budget language and go, okay, where can we see a place the governor could use that veto authority? And they try and veto-proof it. It happens every 2 years. It's going to be tougher now to veto-proof this budget because they can strike at individual numbers, right? What do you do? And they got to think about that, how they draft this thing and how they send it to him, because there's fodder here for Evers to rework stuff to his liking with these kind of reinforced powers.
Yeah, so just a small civics lesson for people who might not know how the budget and how Evers' veto pen works. How does it work in a nutshell?
So back in 1930, voters approved a constitutional amendment that gave governors a partial veto authority. It allowed them to only use on appropriation bills to strike language, okay?
Appropriation means if there's funding involved in the bill? Yep.
If there's money in it. Now, there's a side story about another Supreme Court case out there about what that actually means, if it's just actually has dollars in it or says how to appropriate the money. But we'll say that for another day. The key thing here is, starting in 1930, governors has power to go over any spending bill to use this authority. Voters have reined it in several times. There's the 1990 amendment that you can't strike out letters. Mid-2000s, there's an amendment called the Frankenstein veto. You can't take two different sentences and stitch them together, create a new one. So, it's happened before, but it's a unique power among governors in this country. In fact, it's considered the strongest veto pen in the nation among governors who have it.
Interesting. And so the state Supreme Court, was implicated in this decision. Obviously, it was kind of the first big decision that came out since the election in early April. The justices split on party lines. Can you tell us anything? Was there any kind of insights that came out of their approach to this case?
Interesting that one, conservatives led by Brian Hagedorn, they ripped the majority decision. They've got a problem with it, that this is basically allowing the governor to write the law. It's supposed to be lawmakers write the law. The governor signs the laws and carries them out as executive branch. He's arguing that this is expanding that power of the governor, and he's getting now creeping more and more into the legislative authority. So that's kind of his argument against this, and that the courts, in Hagedorn's words, have basically blessed this expansion of power over the years, and they had a chance to right the ship, and they passed in doing that with this decision.
And I guess Justice Jill Karofsky wrote for the majority that the 400-year modification is, quote, attention grabbing, but that, the state constitution really doesn't limit the governor's partial veto power.
Yeah, and the majority opinion has like a number of recommendations to how to deal with this. Hey, lawmakers, you could change how you draft your bills, the budget bill going forward. You go back to constitutional amendment, that could be something you could do. It doesn't actually call for any of these things or endorse any of them, but it says, hey, here's some options. What's kind of noteworthy to people is that during the arguments back in October, Karofsky said, does this go too far? This 400 years is kind of mind-blowing to think about 400 years. This has gone too far. And her legal analysis, it did not.
You're tuned into Capital Notes. I'm WEWM's Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WizPolitics.com. All right, so shifting gears a little bit, the state GOP announced to its members that it's launching a post-election analysis of the 2025 state Supreme Court race. That's the one where conservative-backed candidate Brad Schimmel lost by 10 points. What do you know about that?
So they sent out this message to members saying, hey, we are going to look at everything from like fundraising and messaging to strategy by third-party groups. We're going to try and just postmortem and have an answer about what to do in 2026. There are a couple issues, though, that people I talk to aren't sure they can solve with the postmortem. One is the electorate has shifted in Wisconsin in spring elections. It's just a fact of life right now that liberals/Democrats have the advantage in the spring. When I started this 25 years ago, the electorate every April was more conservative, older, whiter, more college educated. Those are voters who turned out for conservatives. It's flipped. The Republican base is now more populist. It's more driven by Donald Trump. Those suburbanites that used to be like pretty red voters, they're purpley to blue voters now. Urbaners are turning out more in spring elections. The bottom line is that Democrats/liberals have an advantage every spring. Then you add fuel to that fire, such as Donald Trump and Elon Musk and what's happening out in Washington, D.C. this spring, or abortion in 2023. Remember, the Dobbs decision came down just 9 months before the Supreme Court race. 2020, you had a race that was happening alongside of a primary for president for Democrats that helped boost the liberal candidate. There's example after example where you have this advantage built in the Trump years for Democrats, and then you have this factor that leads you to a 10-point win. So for Republicans, yeah, you can address some strategy stuff. I mean, Republicans like to, for some reason, do their own thing, these various groups doing ads. So we'll see Dick Uline's Fair Courts America do an ad buy. We'll see Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce with its Issues Mobilization Council do its own ad buy. And all these groups doing their own thing. I mean, they're common messages, but they're spending their own money. And why is that key? Because candidates get a better rate on broadcast TV than groups do. So Democrats, largely, you're seeing the money flow through the state party, then to Jill Karofsky, then flow to Susan Crawford, who gets a better rate on TV and can run more TV ads. Now, Crawford also had a phenomenal individual donor network this spring, helped her raise money like I've never seen before for Supreme Court candidates. It's not all about the groups. But what I'm getting at is for Republicans, if you're looking at your strategy, they don't spend money efficiently over there. How will that change? How can the party change that? I don't know. But there are lots of things to address for them, and they have to address it because in 2026, Rebecca Bradley, conservatives up for another 10-year term. Conservatives have to win that seat in 26, have to win the seat in 2027 when Annette would be up again, just to have a shot in 2028 to flip the court again. If you can't win in 2027, you're talking a long time in the winter when it comes to the Supreme Court for conservatives in Wisconsin.
That is super, super interesting. Speaking of post-election kind of analysis, WizPolitics tracked $109 million in spending on the state Supreme Court race this April. Where did all that money go? Who benefits from that? I mean, is it remotely the people of Wisconsin or not at all?
Oh, TV stations made out like bandits. Let's be honest, they did pretty well. But looking at the spending overall, about $59 million was spent by Brad Schimmel and those backing him, $50 million by Crawford, those supporting her. Now, a couple caveats. One, these are numbers I pulled together from looking at independent expenditure reports filed with the state. Those are express advocacy ads, vote for, vote against, support, oppose, those magic words that trigger reporting. I also, we subscribe to Ad Impact at West Politics, which is an ad tracking service. And then I've got my sources with various groups who kind of help me with numbers. What I'm getting at is issue advocacy, like call J.R. Ross, tell him he stinks. Like those aren't reported to anybody. It's hard to know exactly what was spent on those ad buys, and there are plenty of them. So my number of $109 million, probably light. Is it 10 million, 20 million? I don't know. Nobody can tell me for sure. But more was spent than I've tracked. All right, there's that. And two, a lot of money went to spent to on-the-ground organizing. Elon Musk and his PAC, America PAC, spent like $12 million, if I remember it correctly, most of it on canvassing, doing doors, text messages, like trying to get voters out. So you had all this money spent on the get out the vote effort, on ad buys, whether it's digital, radio, TV, the overall effort is where it all went to. And, there was a lot of money spent to try and drive turnout, and it worked. We got 2.35 million people vote in Wisconsin on April 1st. That is impressive for a spring election without a presidential primary on the ballot. It was amazing. Wisconsinites amaze me every election. When the spotlight is on Wisconsin, voters answer the bell every time and turn out in big numbers. It just so happened this one, though, that while Republicans got the number they were looking for, Democrats turned out in even bigger numbers more than anybody anticipated, and that's how you got the 10-point win.
So when it comes to money, basically average Wisconsinites, if they were involved in get out the vote efforts, they might have gotten a little bit of that bag.
Yeah.
But if not, yeah.
If you're getting paid to do doors, it's not, they have these groups that do stuff, but no, it's not flowing to voters like you and I like that. No, it's unless you got your $1 million from Elon Musk. I haven't seen that reported anywhere yet, how they did that one. But so there are 3 people who he says he gave $1 million checks to. So somebody made out like a bandit this spring in Wisconsin, thanks to Elon Musk.
Right, in addition to the TV stations and possibly the U.S. Postal Service with all those mailers. Okay, well, I want to close, as long as we're still talking about elections, with the 2026, a look forward at the 2026 governor's race. Do we know yet if Evers is running for re-election? What's the latest on the potential GOP challengers? Is it Brett Favre? I'm joking about that.
So Evers hasn't said yet what he's going to do. He's told us he'll wait till after the budget. And this comes up in my calls like every week. Hey, is the governor going to run? And my answer hasn't changed on that in probably a year. When I talk to people close to the governor, they tell me he likes the job. As long as his health is doing okay, that his wife's health's doing okay, they think he'll probably run again. Now, there's also his chief of staff is Maggie Gao. There are some who think that if she wants to stick around and do this for 4 more years, that would be a big piece of the decision. But all signs are pointing to that he will likely run. Now, the caveat is, at the end of term number 3, he'd be in his late 70s. That's not exactly a young age to be doing this. So does he want to do this that much longer? There's that piece to it. Looking at the Republican field, there's nobody in yet, but lots of names percolating, and they have a lot to think about. Number one is, what can you take away from the spring election and apply it to November? I caution anybody to say, well, the Dems won by 10 points in April, therefore they're going to win by X points in November of 26. It doesn't work that way. However, there are signs that electorate that people aren't happy about Donald Trump and his administration. There's energy among Democrats. Republicans who are happy about Donald Trump don't seem to be as motivated to go to the polls without Trump on the ballot. So there's something to think about. But as various candidates, potential candidates, kind of weigh their options, Bill Berrien is a businessman from southeastern Wisconsin. He formed a PAC last week that he said is going to help promote conservative causes and advocate for Republican candidates. It's basically campaign and waiting. I've seen these before with others. They get a team together, they start kind of make themselves well known, then they jump in. So he's making moves at least that make you think he's serious about running. Tom Tiffany, congressman from up in Minocqua, he's talking about it. State Senator Mary Felskowski and State Senator Pat Testin. Testin's from Stevens Point. Felskowski's up from the Tomahawk area up in northern Wisconsin. They're at least thinking about it. Josh Schoeman, the Washington County executive, he's thinking about it. So there are lots of folks kicking the tires. Oh, and Eric Hovde. So Eric Hovde lost the Senate race, obviously, in 2022. Does he want to make a comeback, run for governor? Well, we don't know for sure. But lots of people are kicking the tires, and we're going to see that field start to coalesce at some point, probably late summer. You'll start getting answers to people like they're in, they're out, or whatnot, and then away we go in the probably August of 2026.
And of course, we won't know what the big, super big issues will be at that point, but like you said, things are percolating. Thanks so much for these insights, JR, and thanks for joining me on Capital Notes.
Anytime.
That was J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com, speaking with me, WUWM's Maayan Silver. Listen for our segments every other Monday with an extended segment on lake effect, and check out the Capital Notes podcast wherever you get your podcasts.